Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see all of you. Thank you so much for braving the rain to be with us this morning. My name is Emily Leach, and I'm the commercial banking team leader for Heritage Bank in the downtown Portland office. Heritage Bank is a 92-year-old commercial community bank that's relatively new to the Portland market. We've been in Portland for just over 2 years. Heritage Bank is headquartered in Olympia, Washington, and we have 60 offices from Bellingham, Washington, all the way down to Newburgh now. We're so pleased to partner today with Aldrich Technologies and PayneWest Insurance and Oregon Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and then of course Craig Peebles and the team of Oregon Business Magazine to bring you this sufficiently scary program for this October morning. Seriously though, cybersecurity is really no joke. So as a bank, we handle billions of dollars of transactions for our commercial clients, so therefore we often have a front row seat to the challenges that cybersecurity risks present to our clients. For me personally, I have two very scary situations that I've witnessed where one was a situation where some wire fraud was attempted through an email that had been emailed to me by someone pretending to be the CEO of one of my largest clients. This hacker actually hacked into his email and responded to a string arranging a lunch date and then requested a wire for a lot of money. And I passed it on to our wire department because the CEO wanted it. And the wire department did a call back and caught it. And then we had another situation a couple years ago at Christmas time where an entire law firm's network was taken hostage by a hacker, and they were required, the firm administrator, on like Christmas Eve, was required to put thousands of dollars of Bitcoin into a machine to get their network back. This is a major law firm in town that was witness to that, or a victim of that. So really, I mean, cybersecurity is obviously real. We're going to learn a lot today. We're going to be very scared, and then we're going to be presented with some very compelling solutions to address these risks. So we're in for a real treat this October morning. Scary and treats. With that, I wanted to invite David McFeeters-Crone up to introduce our panel, and also himself. So thank you, everyone.
So thank you. I'm David McFeeters-Crone. I run a small consulting firm called Intellectual Assets, and I'm here today to introduce the panel and talk about a couple of things before that happens. So if you'll handle a couple slides for me. First of all, for those of you who aren't already aware of this, the idea of cybersecurity is really an existential threat, both personally, professionally, and to the nation, and maybe even the world as it comes down to it. And it's the problem really is one that is for everybody in the room in some small way. And I'm not sure if that's a perfect analogy, but the thing that always struck me about this poster from World War II is how important it is for you to sort of just generally be on your guard. You just never know what the thing is that you're going to do that may have that downstream effect that's catastrophic for yourself, for your family, for your company, or again, for the nation in some unknown way. So it's unclear in a lot of ways how that will connect. I think in the scenario of canceling dates for a ship that might be going out to sea, the imperative was much more direct. Here things are a lot more hidden, but at the same time, it's important to be able to be on your guard, looking out for those attacks that may be out there. So I'm just going to go through one very, one scenario that was presented to me at a recent conference, and then all of the panelists go through some of their own information that's perhaps even a little more intense. And these are some things you may have heard of, but I didn't realize until this presentation how they were all related. So you may have heard about this first incursion that actually happened over a couple of years for the U.S. government, very embarrassing, the Office of Personnel Management, where an unknown assailant, probably a nation state, came in and took a bunch of information about a lot of individuals, not just any individuals though, those who had applied for a variety of levels of classification. So these are the individuals who have applied and received top secret clearance. Okay, that's sort of bad news, but now what's going to happen? Then there was this other incursion where this one, maybe some of you may have been affected by Premier Insurance. So here's an insurance company, and how's this connected? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So now an insurance company has been hacked, and personal information has been taken, and maybe some medical records, but how does all that relate? I'm not quite clear. And then there's this next one, Ashley Madison. So I'm going to tell you which one. I was affected by one. So Ashley Madison, for those of you who aren't aware, and hopefully you aren't, is a dating site for people who are married, and they try to keep their information as quiet as possible. What ended up happening was that ended up being hacked, and then, according to Dr. Ron Ross of the National Institute of Standards Technology Cyber Division, these are actually all related and perpetrated by the same individual. And so what this nation state was likely after was collecting information from trying to find individuals with top secret clearance, find embarrassing information about them and their family through their health insurance, and also looking for sort of the standard, I'm going to expose your affair behavior. So these are things that are happening in plain sight every day that really are an example of nation-state cyber warfare that's happening underneath your nose. So how can you protect yourself from this? That's what some of these individuals are going to be talking about in terms of how you protect your companies, particularly manufacturers, in this sort of wild world. So I want to point the manufacturers in the group, and actually individuals as well, to a particular resource that's coming out of our government, the National Institute of Standards Technology. They have a cyber framework, which sounds very sort of Matrix-like, or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the idea behind this is that they've set up, not so much a checklist, but just sort of, a structure for you to be able to look at your environment and the various aspects that are out there so that you can prepare yourself. Going through this process from this website and some of its downstream opportunities will give you a great place to start to be able to have conversations with the people who are doing searches for your network, individuals who are helping to help you protect it, and eventually folks who might want to insure it. So with that, I'm going to do some introductions, and then we'll move on. So our first presenter today is going to be John Bicknell. He's a national security thought leader, a lifelong learner, and a passionate analytics visionary. For almost 30 years, he's helped businesses and government organizations derive actionable results from their data, save costs, and make more money. Before retiring from the Marine Corps as a lieutenant colonel in 2010, he led the Street to Fleet program, a process-intensive human resources supply chain effort designed to discover inefficiencies, architect solutions, and repurpose manpower savings repurposed manpower savings. In his corporate career, he's helped businesses derive insights from marketing, financial, human resources, and call center data. He's a member of the Military Operations Research Society and InfraGard. He has a master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School emphasizing econometrics and operations research. After John, we'll be having Peter Adams, who's the Vice President and Strategic Business Strategy at Aldrich Technology, one of our sponsors. Thank you. Peter leads business strategy at Aldrich Technology. For 35 years prior, he ran Lighthouse Information Systems, focused on leading clients through technological and operational challenges in order to promote growth and facilitate successful systems. Peter served clients across countless industries, including agricultural, construction, manufacturing, middle device production, and technology. His approach to IT work lies in consulting clients through complex projects to achieve their ultimate business objectives. Peter's a graduate of UC Santa Cruz in biology and chemistry and Oxford University's Advanced Management Program. Following Peter, we will have Andy Trucknott, the CIC Sales Executives and Commercial Insurance for PayneWest Insurance, another sponsor. Thank you again. Andy started his career in the insurance industry in 2006 with PayneWest Insurance, working as an agent in the small business department. He stayed in that role for 6 years, honing his craft, and has been exposed to all types of businesses and different types of insurance issues. During his career, he's developed a specialty in insurance for professional exposures like accountants, attorneys, doctors, as well as insurance for nonprofits and obviously manufacturers. Organizations that work with Andy benefit because he is detailed, organized, and takes a proactive approach to dealing with insurance. So without further ado, we'll have John come up and talk about how he's doing to help companies understand where some of their exposures are. If you have questions, I think at this point, let's go ahead and take them as they come up. So I'll watch for them and alert the speaker, and we'll move on from there. Thank you.
All right, good morning. Is my mic on? Okay, great. Again, John McNell. My firm is More Cowbell Unlimited. We're developing process technologies for national security and industry. Thank you to Heritage Bank and to Aldrich Technologies for having me come up and share this morning. Emily, Peggy, thank you. So, as was mentioned before, I'm a retired Marine, and so I tend to come at things from a national security perspective. And Dave mentioned a moment ago, existential threats. And the way I look at this is, it doesn't have to be a United States context, but let's just go with the United States. It seems like every generation has its existential crisis that has to be addressed, and take it all the way back to the founding of our country, all the way to the Cold War. And so we have a new existential threat that is confronting us right now, and who can venture a guess as to what that existential threat might be? Cyber? Any other thoughts? Okay. I assert that it's more basic than that. It's just information. Information itself is the threat. And understanding what pieces of information are, contain contaminated information which is coming at us, and which information is good. Information is nothing new. Oh, well, let me start here. Does anybody know who this gentleman is? Any guesses? Any guesses what country this gentleman is from?
North Korea.
North Korea? Okay. Russia. This is General Valery Gerasimov, and he is commensurate with our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, or Secretary of Defense, in Russia. And I'm going to go ahead and just read this to you because I think it's worth hearing. This was an address that he gave to Putin back in the March timeframe of this year. Every year he gives kind of like a state of the state address for defense. So one of the things he said is the information domain, not having a clearly defined international border, provides the possibility for long-range, hidden action upon not only critically important information infrastructure, but also the population of a country, directly influencing the condition of national security of a state. For this very reason, work on the questions of preparation and conduct of actions of an information character is the most important task of military science. That was earlier this year. So, state and non-state actors and adversaries of the United States are deploying information weaponry, and they are studying every aspect of our society, or the Western society, or the free world, or maybe not even the free world. They're studying everything, culture, people, industries, so that they can get information into the fabric of the society and just slide the whole thing sideways and destabilize. So this is what we're up against. Oh, and by the way, this is what we hear so much about these days. The attacks on the population, like the election meddling. The election meddling from 2016, that's nothing new. Russia has been foisting information warfare on us for decades, but it's only just now becoming newsworthy because of the flattening of information. The ability to use information cheaply, quickly, to direct weaponized artificial intelligence, that's what's new these days. But this is what we're hearing so much about. But I am starting to work with some government agencies to start looking at how we can defend critical infrastructure against information attack. And this I believe, the attacks on the population of the country, the social media attacks, I'm not saying that they're a distraction, but I'm saying that there's more to the story that's not really being talked about very much, and that's attacks on public and private critical infrastructure participants. What is critical infrastructure? Well, the Department of Homeland Security is the directorate that is responsible for Homeland, for protecting our critical infrastructure. There's 16 different sectors, and here they are up on the board. but it's a vast portion of our economy. They define critical infrastructure something like if there's any significant deterioration of one or more of these sectors, then the entire society is at risk. And it's all interconnected. Think about our critical infrastructure as or think about our society as this beautiful golden egg that needs to be cherished, and it's held up by this infrastructure or this, scaffolding of thousands of years of technology built into the scaffolding, and it can all come down at any time. And that's what we need to protect. So one of my colleagues says that information warfare and information weaponry in the cyber domain, it's like a chronic disease. It's not going away. It cannot be cured, but it has to be managed. Just like all of those other existential crises that we had in our history, we have to figure out a way to manage this so that we can make it through. And I was also talking with somebody earlier, this isn't all bad. The information age is a glorious dawning that promises all kinds of benefits to the United States and people in general. There are fewer people in poverty today than have ever been in the existence of ever. So the other side of the coin, though, is weaponized information, and that's what we need to manage. So what is information? Information is literally everything. And this is founded in academic rigor. I'm not just saying this, but there are complex ecosystems are self-emergent in their information. So the entire Earth is actually a little speck of information in the vast cosmos. And within the Earth are all of the processes that run our lives, the weather, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the concept of, this is getting a little geeky here, but the concept of a dissipative information ecosystem is important. And think about your body, or I'll get to that in a moment. But the Earth receives inputs and it exits outputs, and in between it processes information. So the sun provides a source of life. We have the internal operations of the Earth, the nuclear decay and the processing of the core of the Earth. All of this helps sustain life and churn things on. And so information comes in, it gets processed, and then it gets exhausted. And it's the same thing with us. Your body, your life is a process, and it is a dissipative ecosystem. You intake oxygen and you process it and you blow out CO2. Trees, on the other hand, they intake CO2, they process it, and they blow out oxygen. And in such a way, think of this as like critical infrastructure and how things are interconnected as well. But this is bringing in information, processing, and then blowing it out. And so what information warfare is all about is figuring out what information do I need to put into the ecosystem in order to damage it. So for our human bodies, if we intake poison, we'll die. Process the poison and die. If we shut off oxygen, then our body processes the lack of oxygen and you die. It's the same thing with trees. If you inject information into the tree's ecosystem, certain information will cause the tree to die. So this is how information warfare works. And getting back to studying the adversaries, what I think that the Russians and the Chinese and other state and non-state actors are doing is they are intently studying every aspect of our society. And they're doing it so that they understand the processes. And if they can inject information into the ecosystem, your company, then that your company, just like your body, ingests information, processes it, and then outputs it in the form of products or new market demand for materials and goods, and on and on and on. But if they can put the right information into your ecosystem and you process it, then it can cause you and your executives to make decisions which are adverse to your company's future growth. That's how information warfare works. So this is kind of a silly example, but quite frankly, I think this may be one of the most important things that I'm trying to communicate to our federal government. So think about your organization as a spider, and you've got this ecosystem which includes your web. your corporate footprint, and it could be a global footprint. But everything about your organization is contained within that ecosystem. So we know that if you've got a spider and a bug lands in the spider's web, that the spider is going to scurry down the web, grab the bug, roll it up, and eat it. That's what's known as a reflexive response. And one of the things that my organization is looking at is how do organizations respond reflexively to various different stimuli. So if, for example, you can do something like a DDoS attack on your organization and you're monitoring the processes of your organization, how do those processes react to a DDoS attack, or a dumpster fire out back, or a hurricane event? And if those types of reflexive responses can be understood, then that empirical process change can be used in a larger cyber kill chain, for example. So this is what's happening in a social construct. The enemy is understanding our social dialogue, and they're dropping topics into our social dialogue, which either creates confusion or anger or distrust amongst people within the ecosystem. So not to get political here, but I mean, you can all come up with your own thoughts as to what these types of things might be. But one that you might not be aware of is the anti-vax movement. That is an information warfare campaign being seeded by adversaries of the state, putting information into the social discourse that not getting vaccinated might be a good idea, because I'm not an expert on this, but one in several millions of kids, or whatever the ratio is, get affected adversely by the vaccination. And then you're starting to see things like measles outbreaks crop up that haven't happened for decades. That's an information warfare attack. And it's dropping information into the public discourse that causes people to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do. And it's an empirical thing. It's using probabilistic process modeling to understand that if I do this, 30% of the people will do that, 70% will do that, and understanding how information flows through a network. And the same thing can be done in your organization. Other examples of weaponized AI that's happening these days, have y'all heard of Deepfake technologies? If you Google Deepfake, there's some pretty impressive examples of celebrities and President Obama and other people, saying things that they never said and doing it with video, and it's very convincing. You can look at something from maybe 2 or 3 years ago and be like, yeah, that's fake. But if you look at something today, it's like, fake. So this type of weaponized AI is becoming cheaper to do and more prolific, and can influence people in ways that just were not possible, just a few years ago. Here's another one that most people don't know about. These are called GANs attacks. So this is, again, ingesting information, processing it, and then outputting an undesirable result. It's been demonstrated that driverless cars, one of the ways driverless cars navigate around the road is by reading road signs, speed limit signs, stop signs, as well as using satellite technology to make sure that they're going the speed limit, things like this. But the point is that some of these computer vision algorithms are so brittle that just a little bit of a defacing of a stop sign, which we as people would still recognize as a stop sign, the computer algorithm, just blanks on it. And they interpret this as either not a stop sign or a speed limit sign or something else, and just blast right on through the stop sign. So you can imagine the kind of havoc that this can throw into a society. But the point is not just stop signs. This can be done within SCADA for internal control systems, and whatever the processes are that are running in your various different companies. These same RPA, does anybody know what RPA is? Robotic process automation. That's using AI to automate decision making within process flows. If tainted information comes into those RPA algorithms that start making decisions within your organization that you don't want to make, the AI doesn't know any different. So that's information warfare. So I think this may be the second to last slide. So I'm developing a model to look at this from a critical infrastructure perspective. And it's trying to communicate that it's everything. You know, 10 years ago, 50 years ago, a firm's operating environment was a lot more controlled and that the information coming in was a lot more manageable. But now it's literally everything. Every organization has some kind of a social footprint, like a social media footprint. That can be invaded, and the discourse, you know, it can like torpedo a brand. You know, your organizations work very hard to create a reputation in the marketplace, and that can be brought down, you know, with a clever information warfare attack. Your internal operations I was discussing, that you can get information into those internal operations so that you're making faulty decisions. Interacting with the world in ways that were just not possible a few years ago. And then finally, you've got, you know, this great flattening of people being able to cheaply and in a very targeted manner direct information at your organization and at society in ways that are scary. So this is how I am starting to describe the existential threat that is facing us. And so bottom line, there's no boundaries. Our adversaries, Russia, China, they don't think of war like we do. We think of war as like going off to fight, you know, bullets and lead on target. This is also war. We're in the middle of a war right now, and it's war below the level of armed conflict. It's a long game. And quite frankly, I think that, you know, this beautiful society that we should be cherishing, you know, we've been lulled into a sense of complacency that this is just the way it is. Hey, you know, life is good. You know, no one's messing with us. This is new and it's existential. And information is the fundamental element of armed conflict in this new world that we're facing. And peacetime is the decisive phase of operations. I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion, and I hope I made it in less than 15 minutes.
I can't decide if I really would like to be at the bar with a shot right now to take in everything that John has shared with us, or if I want to go and just go for a long run to get some of this out of my head. But now we're going to hear a little bit more about, from Aldrich Technology, what you can do to prepare and protect yourself for some of these issues. So hopefully this will be a little more sobering.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, John. I'm now appropriately nervous. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing up here. Okay, so you're familiar with quality? Over 30 years ago, quality, there was that thing you put at the end of your manufacturing process to capture bad product, and all it did was reduce your yield and hated expense you didn't want. Okay, cyber is in the same state today. So what we're talking about now is kind of, we're putting it at the end of the process, and I want to argue for designing security in at the beginning of the process. So with that as kind of backdrop, what we are faced with now is how do we retroactively put security into the environment today to protect us in the future as we evolve the systems we have. So one of the things there are a couple myths I want to dispel. The first one is, who are you in the world? I know that you have various companies, Craig's from Greenbrier, different people from different places, that's great. But, you know, on the internet, you are an IP address, just a number. Everybody remember the old phone book? Okay, good. Glad some of us are old enough to remember phone books. Just had a list of phone numbers in it. Okay, and it translated names to phone numbers. IP addresses translate the names like greenbrier.com or aldrichtechnologies.com or whatever it might be into IP addresses. So the internet is based on IP addresses. All IP addresses are assigned. You don't get to pick yours. You get it assigned. And it's basically, well, the other thing I want to mention is that hackers write programs that autonomously go out and probe the internet. It's not somebody sitting behind a desk trying to actually go after you specifically. They don't know you. It's all anonymous. So this is what you see, right? You're the pretty person up at the top. You see things like Google, or you see your manufacturing process, or you see your computer. You see things like that that have some meaning to you in the world. What a hacker actually sees is just IP addresses and numbers. So you, as a business person, your business has an IP address. That address is basically, it's just like this. It's 4 series of numbers all tied up there. And it's just like anybody else. It could be the Department of Defense has an IP address, the Navy has an IP address, Google has an IP address, Microsoft, and so does your company. Your CNC machine internally might have an IP address. These are all just addresses. One of the important things is that all addresses get attacked with roughly the same frequency. The average for our clients is about 2,000 attacks a minute. Okay? Doesn't matter what the IP address is, doesn't matter what the company is, that's the frequency of attacks. These are all automated attacks. It's not somebody. So one of the things we can do to try and mitigate some of this risk, and I know this is going to sound really pedantic and kind of boring, is passwords. Everybody have passwords? Everybody got like millions of passwords, or it seems like that way sometimes? Okay, who thinks that really long passwords are a great idea? Or really complex passwords? Okay, so here's some examples. So if you have a 7-character password like bankers, it takes 29 milliseconds to crack it. That's not very long. So let's add a whole bunch of complexity to it. Still 20.29 milliseconds, very small. So let's make it a little bit longer. You got 8 characters. Well, it takes 5 hours. That's an improvement. Do you feel safe if you have a 5-hour password? No. Now, when I say crack it, you can Google cracking software, download it to your PC, and you can crack your own password and see how long it takes. That's actually what we did to generate this. Footballs, here you go, 9 characters, takes 5 days. It's a little better than 5 hours. 10 characters, metrology, takes 4 months. How about flow matters, 11 characters, that takes a decade. That's not bad. And you notice flow matters has no weird characters in it. How about that? So if you had a 14-character password, it'd take 1,000,000 years. Using current technology. 1,000,000 years, I'm probably okay with that. If somebody wants to hack my account 1,000,000 years from now, they can have it. So what this means is that we need to kind of shift our paradigm from thinking that, high degree of complexity, frequent password changes, all this kind of stuff that we've been living with. That's all for naught. That's 5-10 years ago. Today, length of your password matters. So I suggest you use a passphrase, which is a sequence of words that you can remember. Something like, my dog has fleas, right? I love my banker. My company rocks. I don't care what it is, right? The length of the password of your passphrase is what matters. How many of you could remember a passphrase like that? Pretty much everybody. How many of you can remember the password that your IT department assigns you that has all these characters, upper, lowercase, symbols? Can you remember those? No. So what do? You write them down. Well, doesn't that kind of violate the whole idea of security? Right? So you know where the #1 place is you all keep your passwords? It's either on the monitor or it's at the bottom of the keyboard. Right? How secure is that? Do you think your coworkers don't know where you keep your passwords? Of course they do, because they keep theirs in the same place.
They have to use ours. They have to know where we keep it.
There you go. But this is why, every individual user in your business should have an account. The account should have a password. The password policy needs to be in place. There should not be exceptions, right? How many people think that the CEO, because, I've been one, I know, CEOs are always not the brightest tool in the shed. So we know that we can't handle password changes, so we exempt ourselves because we're the CEO, right? We're cool, right? So we don't have to deal with password policy. Wrong. You still do. Everybody, no matter what their role in the organization, needs to have the password policy, needs to be enforced. Okay, this is one of my last slides here. So, not all data is the same. Do you need to protect your marketing data that you're going to publish anyway? Your brochures? Do you need to protect that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe until it's published, but by and large, the risk of that getting compromised that you're going to publish anyway is pretty minimal. So the data you need to protect is things where there's liability around it. HR, huge liabilities around HR. Financial data, your customer data, probably your intellectual property. If you have special processes, things like that you need to protect. The other thing you need to protect against is not just your data getting out in the world and people taking it, it's people injecting data into your systems. So what if you have your control systems for your manufacturing line and somebody injects data in there that changes the behavior of the control systems and changes your manufacturing process? Would that be bad? Would that be a bad day? Yeah, so we had a client up off in the Ivy Lake area. They were making a silicon, basically created a process for, a continuous process for making silicon wafers. And they put all the silicone and all the stuff in a big crucible, which they heat to like 5,000 degrees, which is all controlled by complex systems. What would happen if that control system got compromised? You'd have a 5,000 degree bomb in your factory. Right? You can't do that. So we need to look at what data, what systems, and treat them differently. So your manufacturing control network needs to be managed and approached differently than, say, your corporate network. Right on the corporate side of the house, you have people, they need to browse the internet, they need to go look at their customers, look at vendors, so they need access to the world. Your control network does not. So you need to secure them differently. Today, with the rise of the Internet of Things, IoT, have you heard that phrase, IoT? Okay. These devices are largely connected wirelessly, and they're mostly, at this point, they're monitoring devices, and they need to be able to reach the internet to do their thing. So they need to have access to the internet, and they need to be connected to the control network, but the control network can't have access to the internet, or shouldn't. So you need to figure out how you're going to create this tunnel or this path between these two networks without exposing your control network. This is doable, by the way. Your engineers, everybody have engineers? Or some people have engineers? Right? Engineers like to invent stuff, right? They do all kinds of things all the time. They're always pushing the boundaries, they're trying new stuff. Do you want them trying brand new stuff in the same network in which you are running your business or controlling your manufacturing floor? No, you want them in a completely separate area. They have different needs, so you need to manage it differently. So you need to architect your network differently. So security needs to be thought of at the beginning of the process, not at the end. It's architectural. If you're trying to retrofit security into existing environments, know that you can't solve everything. It's just not possible. And the environment has to drive the appropriate level of security for the particular area you're trying to secure. And you don't have to do the same thing everywhere. You can do some similar tools and stuff. My last point is that security is an issue of human beings. It's not a technological problem. Okay? People do what people do. I can create the most absolute secure environment in the world. I can even not connect it to the internet, period. Right? Would that be secure? That's great until some human being does some action. Maybe when somebody calls them and says, hey, I'm from IT, I need to fix your laptop, but I need your password. And they hand out their password. You guys would never do that, right? Funny, 15% of the people in the world do. So, how's that for, they go through training. We have all kinds of training we go through, right? We teach everybody, we don't give out passwords, don't give out passwords, don't pick up USB sticks that are lying around and plug them into your computer. 3% of the people plug a USB stick into their computer, even though we've told them not to. 15% give out their passwords. So what we're fighting here is human nature, human behavior. And there are some places where you can apply technology to mitigate that risk. But at the end of the day, we're talking about a human problem, not a technology problem. Okay. Any questions? Okay. Well.
Thank you, Peter. This issue of human involvement is, just that we're sort of our own worst enemies in a lot of these situations. Again, I'll use a lot of government examples. There was the the Stuxnet virus, which was used to attack the Iranian centrifuges, which is an example of a manufacturing cyber warfare that was perpetrated by some other nation state, perhaps the United States, perhaps Israel, who knows. But that all got moved in by someone at some point taking a physical object, likely a flash drive of some sort, and inserting it in the network. So you can have all of the sort of firewalls that you want, like this, where you've separated your engineering network from your manufacturing network, but if someone bridges the gap, if someone takes the air out of the air gap, then you're out of luck. And so it just requires constant vigilance. So, but sometimes all that constant vigilance, even though you tried, you set up your systems in order to compensate for human behavior, sometimes things don't go right. And so in those situations, it's good to have a handy insurance agent. So we have Andy talk now.
No handy jokes though, okay. Really good couple of first in line speakers. I was telling somebody earlier that the challenge for me would be to take off my learning hat and put on my speaking hat. I was happy to see that I heard a new couple of words together, dissipative ecosystem, but I did spell them correctly. That was good. How do we insure against this cyber exposure? A lot of times when we talk about cyber with our clients, we have to spend a lot of time quantifying the exposure to them to try to get them up to speed to understand what it is that we're talking about. Obviously, we don't have to do that today. These two guys have done an awesome job of doing that. For those who don't know, PayneWest is an independent insurance agency, one of the larger independent insurance agencies in the Northwest. We have something like 33 offices and 750 employees, personal lines, commercial lines, which I'm a part of, and a benefits division as well. We invest quite a bit in this exposure and are continually learning and trying to get up to speed with the industry. It's kind of a cool thing to be involved with in the insurance industry. Typically people think insurance and it's kind of an antiquated thing like property insurance. Just not a lot changes, but in the cyber world, it's almost always changing, and carriers are trying to keep pace with that, and we are as well. I don't have to quantify it to you, but I certainly do want to contextualize where it sits on your radar. This is a page from a report that Aldrich actually did for us last year, and I had some out at the table. It's called our Discover Insight Report, and then we have this year's out there as well. But we asked our clients a whole host of questions, really interesting feedback. One of the questions is, what is your primary risk facing your business? And they say probably what most of you guys would say. In fact, one of these guys said that, first thing he said, what's going on with you guys? Well, we're looking for people. We're looking for good people. It's the biggest thing that our clients and most organizations are talking about. And cyber is not your biggest exposure, right? It's not, when you think about what's your primary risk facing your business, cyber is not at the top of the list, but we've heard today that it certainly is an exposure that has merit. Definitely want to devote some time and energy into it, and planning for it and preparing for it. In your standard insurance program, for a little more context, you may have all of these policies, you may even have a few more of these policies, you may not have quite all of them depending on who your organization is and how many employees and all of that kind of a thing. But the point of this is that there can be quite a lot to an insurance program, right? And just providing context of where a cyber insurance policy might fit in, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but that it should be separate from your other lines of insurance. But there certainly is, it's not your primary risk, but it is a risk facing your business, and there certainly is a place within your insurance program to address that risk properly. Where does a cyber insurance policy pay losses? When a carrier puts together the policy, they have two buckets with which they pay losses out of, a first-party bucket and a third-party bucket. The third-party bucket is your liability losses, and your first-party bucket is where almost all of the losses get paid out of. PayneWest as an agency, I think all of the losses that our clients have experienced in the cyber world have all been first-party losses. I don't think we've had any clients experience a cyber loss that's been a third-party loss. I was talking to a rep from Chubb, and they're on really small business cyber policies to really, really large business cyber policies, right? The ones you read about in the newspaper, they experience some of those losses as well. They're at close to 90% for the losses that they pay out are all first party. So when we think about where a cyber policy pays out losses, it's almost all in the first party column. Those are forensic costs, the cost to figure out where the breach occurred, how did that happen, is access still open, all of that kind of a thing, the notification costs, data restoration, your business interruption, your cyber extortion. Some of these are done by a third party, right? If you have Chubb or Travelers or Beasley or whoever is your carrier, they're not going to do the actual forensics. They're going to hire a third party to do it. They're not even going to negotiate your ransom. They're going to hire a third party to do that. Which that Chubb rep, by the way, said ransomware for manufacturing firms is their biggest accelerant on where they're seeing cyber claims. More so than healthcare, more so than any other industry. Manufacturing and ransomware is number one for those guys. This is the last slide that I've got to talk to you about today, but when you're asking yourself how do you properly insure for a cyber exposure. When we sit down with our clients, we talk about having a separate policy in place. We do see a lot of organizations that have, a lot of carriers do this, they have an add-on or endorsement to their property and liability policy, maybe on their management liability or their professional liability. What we tell our clients is, oftentimes those come with limits of $250,000 would be a high one. Sometimes it's as low as $50,000. It's super inadequate limits. It's weak coverage form. Oftentimes those add-ons and endorsements don't even have first-party losses. They're all third-party coverage. So they wouldn't even apply to your most, the thing that's going to pop up first for you. And it truly would feel like having no coverage at all if you were to experience a real data breach. For a separate cyber policy, there are a lot of carriers that provide them. We're an independent agency and we represent a lot of different carriers. But it's really good to evaluate your own exposure, figure out what it is that you need to insure against, what are you trying to protect, what kind of limits you're going to need in order to do that. Gather the proposals from the different carriers. The cyber policies will be worded differently. They'll have different words to describe the same thing, so doing a side-by-side comparison can be kind of tricky. There will also be wild variations in the premium. Some companies will charge 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times as much as the next company for the same thing. It's a really varied landscape out there in cyber insurance. And some of the carriers provide first-party coverage in such a way that they can stack up their first-party coverage without affecting your overall aggregate limit. So they'll pay, if forensics is going to be the biggest part of your loss, which oftentimes it is, they'll pay that separately outside that aggregate limit. So if you buy $1 million policy or $3 million policy, they'll pay the forensics cost outside of that so it doesn't touch your $1 million or $3 million. They'll pay the notification costs outside of that. So you keep that limit available for your other first-party costs, your business interruption or whatever else it is that policy is going to pay out on. So that's pretty much the cyber insurance piece of the presentation. We always stress that, Peter laid out a great plan to protect your cyber exposure. And insurance really is just the funding for that plan. So that's what we have.
I want to thank all our speakers. Peter from PayneWest, Andy from PayneWest, Peter from Aldrich Technology, and John from More Cowbell. Also our sponsors, which would be Oregon Business, PayneWest, Heritage Bank, Aldrich Technology, and I think it's everyone. Did I miss anyone? Peggy? Excellent. We now have a fair amount of time for questions. I'm going to start things off with one. We also have a microphone that we can bring around to people if the room is too big. My first question is this. This is a sincere one. So there's a limited budget for everything, and so now I've got a certain amount set aside. I have to decide what to do with that first amount of money. The answer cannot be everything. You have to spend it on something first. Do you plan? Do you protect? Or do you prepare for the eventual going down in your system? And so I'll start with John, and then I'll just like Peter to chime in. And this question's not for you, Andy.
So the question is, plan, prepare, protect. What?
Plan, protect, or prepare for going down, which would be like, storage of offsite data. Be ready for when it happens. Recovery. That's what I was looking for.
Okay. I would go with plan from the perspective of what I was talking about, in that two things we mentioned. I think all of us mentioned. Y'all did more so than I did, but it's people. People is the common and most critical vulnerability in all of this. And so planning from the people perspective means train the workforce, train the executives. Everybody needs to sit up and take notice that this is happening. It's not going away. It's for real. When I was in the military, and I know it's insane in the corporate world, there's all kinds of, HR training. You got to do this, you got to do that, yada yada. It's like, put that in the rearview mirror. This is like everybody's got to up level their education in the digital age, from social media literacy, just general digital media, digital literacy. Our kids, everybody, your parents. Someone mentioned, you get a phone call, and the king of the Congo needs help to save his princess, and you, mom and dad are opening up the checkbook. Everybody needs training on this. So that's number one. And also relative to information warfare, defense planning, because we don't know how to defend against it yet. That's still emerging. I've got some thoughts on that, but I would go with plan first.
Peter?
Well, I can't argue with planning. I'm a big fan of planning. But I think that pragmatically, there's a whole number of steps you can take that have effectively net zero cost. It really doesn't cost you any money to implement a password policy. It doesn't cost you anything to have some employee training. It doesn't really cost you anything to make sure that your antivirus software is patched and up to date, like your operating system should be. It doesn't cost you to do a whole bunch of these, what I'll call the basic blocking and tackling, which is where 90% of the threats the successful threats actually come through on all the basic things. It's not the fancy stuff. I strongly encourage you to get the basic stuff handled, and then you can look at what you want to do specific for your industry or your business to take that next little step. But you'll get 90% of the stuff covered. Most of the cases we get brought into, we're doing cyber analysis on systems that don't even have the basics covered. So why do you want to spend a big chunk of money on me to analyze your vulnerabilities when you don't even have a password policy in place? It's like, get the basic stuff handled first. It's darn near free. Do you want to take anything on that?
I totally do.
All right, so this question's more directed towards Andy, and then I'll go to the floor, or I'll start going down my list again. So if a client has come to you, and a potential client, and they know that they need insurance, but they haven't really done anything yet. How do you advise them? Where do they go next? And then somewhere in there, could you sort of answer, like, how much do these policies end up costing?
Yeah, the advice sounds quite a lot like what Peter was talking, John was talking about. Planning and preparing is the key to protecting your cyber exposure. A cyber policy will help quite a lot, especially if you experience event. It'll help fund the plan that you put in place. Prepare not to let happen, but They do happen. They happen to really sophisticated clients and with clients that, organizations that have almost no sophistication. So they happen to anybody. It really isn't a cost issue. Usually people that we talk to, they're not buying or not buying because of the cost. It's really they don't understand the landscape very well, and they don't feel like they have somebody to help them navigate the landscape to the right solutions. The cost for a cyber policy, we did one earlier this week for a manufacturing facility down in the valley, and 50 people worked there, and the cyber insurance with $1 million limit was $2,000. Super affordable, right? For a $2 million limit, it was $300 more than that. Very, very affordable stuff. So there's no reason to not insure it from a dollars and cents perspective. The real issue is people don't quantify the exposure very well, which I think everybody in this room today, after hearing this you guys speak, has quantified the exposure really well in their own head for sure. And you know, it's understanding what the landscape is and finding the right path to get to where you want to go.
Thank you. Question in the back?
Hi, good morning, Mark Berkovich. John, this is directed at you. So I'm walking to my car after this, and some mugger comes at me. Two possible things happen. Either he gets hurt or I get hurt. The cops are going to come, and there's going to be a result, there's going to be a consequence as a result of that. So that's the traditional sort of analogy. So from what you've described is that there are people attacking me every single day, sometimes a foreign adversary, maybe a foreign nation state. And it seems like our society is in denial, or a portion of our society is in denial about this happening. What's it going to take to wake everybody up that we actually have to do something about this?
Great question, Mark. There's talk of the cyber 911, which could be the Great Awakening, akin to 911 or Pearl Harbor, except the cyber information version of that. I hope it doesn't come to that, but it seems to me that human nature, and this is germane to insurance and everything, human nature is to delay doing things that are difficult, or there's plenty of stuff that occupies our day-to-day lives to spend time and resources and money, effort on doing something that is may never be worth doing because it may never get executed, an insurance policy. But sometimes a wake-up call is required. The answer is I don't know. There are government programs. The United States government is looking at things. We just talked about this beforehand with NIST, putting together a robust suite of artificial intelligence related data standards covering the gamut. That is something that's underway. But other governments, Canada for one, but especially governments that are in closer proximity with Russia, especially like Estonia and Georgia, those folks are, I think, leaning forward a lot more into this challenge. I think largely due to the proximity of the Russian threat. Now, even though there's this global leveling of information being able to be shared and directed and weaponized from anywhere in the world, geographic proximity still matters. So, as I've mentioned, the United States has just been this very fortunate position for the last couple hundred years where we've got these vast oceans and countries that are on our borders that are not terribly threatening, and that has, made us a little bit soft in some ways that I hope we don't have to learn the lesson the hard way.
Thanks. Peter Sanders. First, I want to thank you for the password advice. I'm going to do two things when I go home. I'm going to change all my passwords to passphrases. I'm going to apologize to my wife for having used passphrases for the last year or two, and I laughed at her. So, thank you for that. You mentioned antivirus software, and we all have that on our PCs, but from a corporate standpoint, how advanced are the firewall providers or infrastructure that's being placed there to protect the corporate environment? Are those software providers evolving at the same pace, or is this a custom solution per company? What do you see as state of the art there?
Well, it's not one size fits all, but most of the top tier providers of security devices, i.e. firewalls, are doing actually quite a good job keeping up. But it's relatively a losing battle because they're fighting an entire industry that's aimed at trying to penetrate. And so they're always chasing their tail. But I think your top providers are doing an excellent job with that.
As a follow-up to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, my was curious. So, as a follow-up to that question, just not even on a security standpoint, what technologies, your software consulting development firm, what technologies would you recommend people stay away from? If you look at a lot of legacy technologies, a lot of legacy database technology out there, for a lot of groups, especially in the insurance industry as well, how exposed are those companies? How is it important to upgrade, or are there things around there that you can do to kind of mitigate those kind of risks?
Well, to story to answer your question, we had a customer that they were basically a company that did a lot of work in the medical space, and they had written their entire enterprise operating environment in Fox Pro. Fox Pro has no security in it. It has ceased being a product 15, I don't know, maybe even 20 years ago. They can't retrofit security into an environment that once you access the environment, you have access to 100% of the data that's therein. So to answer your question, I think it's incumbent upon people to stay relatively current with their technology. Keep things patched, keep things up to date, have a plan in place for staying current, which means that to do that on a cost-effective basis, you want to minimize customizations to your environment. You want to use the products as standard as possible. I strongly encourage companies to evaluate and consider moving to the cloud. The cloud environment, by and large, is more secure than any of your individual companies can be. They employ more people doing security than you have employees. So I think that in a general direction, that would be kind of my overall philosophy.
I have a question about supply chain, and this, I think you all could answer it, but I want to start with Andy. I know you mentioned that it was mostly first-party claims, but does that mean that you're not at risk for your supply chain members, people who are giving you information or products or designs or people, putting you also at risk?
Yes, certainly there's an exposure there. Those cyber policies, it is even still part of the first party loss column, contingent business income, right? If your supplier is shut down due to some cyber event and you can't get your materials to make what it is that you're ready to make, and therefore you're not able to, send product out and generate revenue, that's a cyber loss on your end, contingent business income. We see losses occur all the time where people are gaining access from one company and using it to get to another company. That can be a third-party situation where they gain access to organization A to get to B, but organization A has a liability exposure because B now is the one with the real loss and blaming organization A. So they do happen, and they're certainly out there.
So Peter, what are the things you can do are there some special things you can do that are different in order to help you in the supply chain world?
Well, one thing I think is you need to make sure that your suppliers have some sort of security program in place. What you're trying to mitigate is having them somehow have that supply disrupted so that you don't get the products or the services you need when you need them. So you want to make sure they have some program in place to ensure that continuity. That can be, you can ask them some simple questions. I mean, some of our clients get these huge swarm surveys based on NIST which go on for, a few hundred pages, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something much more pragmatic and applicable to your supply chain, which is, do they have a security policy in place? How do they react when they have a breach? Do they have recoverable backups? Remember, having backups is actually useless if you can't recover from them. So you want to make sure they have recoverable backups. That's the #1 way to prevent against ransomware. Right? Simple backup and recovery procedure. Just restore. Right? So those kinds of things I think are good and viable questions to ask.
John, you want to chime in on that?
Sure. Two things. When I think of supply chain and critical infrastructure, information warfare context, two things. Well, I didn't go into great detail, but the 16 critical infrastructure sectors comprise hundreds, maybe thousands of public and private firms for each sector, and some firms may be considered like, well, I'm both healthcare and emergency services, so it's not just like a clean line. The point is there's, as a sector, there's like a big, raw material and labor supply demand signal that's worldwide, and so your firms are part of that demand signal. And there's certain raw materials which may be especially in short supply or can be cornered because they're not in short supply, but they're only in this one little piece of Africa is where this rare mineral is found. And so one of the analyses that we're looking at doing is how these networks of supply are can be weaponized by adversaries and basically choking off something that's critical to making the kinds of things that you make. So that's #1. #2, also supply of labor we've been talking about, but who you let into your organization matters. Your contractors, your companies that you hire as to outsource some kind of a capability that you don't want to pay for internally. They matter a whole lot, and people need to vet very carefully the people that come into the organization, either by logging in virtually or actually walking in the door. Got to be very, very mindful of who comes in.
Question?
Yeah, so kind of a follow-up on that. Are there certifications for products or services for cyber that you guys are familiar with that you would recommend people seek? Right.
I think what Dave mentioned earlier is the NIST standard is, I think, 27001 cyber standard. I think that's ISO. The ISO standard, I believe, covers that. And actually, my firm published an information warfare defense standard. There's a flyer out there where we also mention that as like one of many checklist items to consider. It doesn't solve the problem, but it says think about this.
Yeah, so that would be like a self-certification. Is there any third-party certifications that?
Yeah, ISO 27001. There are vendors who will come in and
I think the common ones you see are for most organizations are a SOC compliance system. So SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3.
And over there from behind.
Yeah, my question's, excuse me, more supply side in terms of certifications and credentials. My name's Andy Wright. I work at a university here in town. We have some cybersecurity programming, homeland security degree, but it's kind of niche. And of course, hearing, the study that Andy cited, and then think about the incurable nature of sort of, the accelerating forces and this risk domain in general. How can universities be orienting some of our resources a little more carefully with an eye to the future? In our new program development, thinking how do we build a program we can put students through, get them in industry, and then maybe 10 years from our creating the program, have the students be prepared to have an impact there. Are there some ways that we should be thinking about more credentialing or more ways kind of aligning our resources as universities to lean into some of these spaces and make sure they're shipping to the street with qualified candidates?
I can't answer that.
I'll take a first stab at it. So I guess I'm pausing for how to phrase this. There's no great way to phrase it, but it's important to be mindful of the culture and the rights that we cherish here in America, and it's really easy to start going into bad places like McCarthyism and deteriorating rights in order to mitigate these challenges. There's very live discussions right now between the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense just recently unfurled a new capability directed by the President, directed by the administration to, that I'm not so well versed in it to really go into a lot of detail, but in my ham-fisted way, it starts blurring the line a little bit between what the Department of Defense can do relative to homeland security surveillance and what, it's establishing the swim lanes in order to mitigate this threat that is coming at us at light speed right now. And so I think educating youngsters in our universities, back in the 1950s, you had these school drills, everybody get under your desk for nuclear drills and stuff like that. That's where we need to go with this somehow, and in a way that honors the rights that we cherish here in America. But things need to start getting into a lot more of a whole of society, everybody's on the same team, let's pull on the rope in the same direction type of an attitude. And it's going to start maybe for people who take this into bad areas, it's going to start feeling a lot more, militarized or something. I mean, don't look at it in a bad way. Look at it like this is what we got to do in order to, survive in the 21st century. I hope that I'm describing that right.
Can I ask you if your question was more about general awareness, which I think is what John sort of talked about?
Yeah.
Or are you talking about specifically training like IT professionals?
Sure, I think I'm curious to know both. If
Okay.
there's additional depth that we should add to our programs where all academic programs have some components of this, which resonates a bit with John's thinking, or if there's more specific depth in kind of new emerging areas that universities should pursue, where you guys from your vantage point see a need for more kind of training or training professionals.
Do you want to take the next step?
I'll just take a quick stab at that. It's a tough question. There's no easy answer. But I think universities have a unique position in that they're training the developers for the future. And so I think if security is brought in as part of the software development curriculum, so that the software is designed with security from the get-go, that solves part of the problem. The other issue with security is architectural. What happens when you take these different building blocks and put them together to create systems and automate process? And I think that's the other part where we need to bring in security, because the interplay between those multiple pieces are where exposures happen.
Yeah, I don't hardly feel qualified to answer this question because I'm not in that environment at all, but what I can tell you is when we talk to organizations about how they're dealing with their cybersecurity, and Peter mentioned this earlier, that so many threats come from their own people. People just making mistakes. Cybersecurity is often an HR issue, right? And the more that those cyber professionals can interact with their coworkers and their colleagues, the better they'll be prepared to interact in the workplace for sure.
One thing I wanted to add, and I saw a question over here, is, and as they were talking, it doesn't have to be just an IT only issue. Like it wouldn't be a bad thing if it pervaded the entire university, and maybe that would be something that the university could do even more passively. Like for example, when it does, I don't know what the requirements are for university for your passwords, but maybe they should be requiring passphrases, right? Or maybe you should be just constantly informing your MBA students about this existential threat that's out there and what does it really mean? Why do we use passphrases? What is going on? Because if you're a kid going through this, it's the last thing on your mind. I mean, generally speaking, privacy is just, out the door all the time, no matter with all the apps are on, they have no clue what's going on. And it's a very sobering result with what's going on with their personal information. But now if you think about some of where it could all go, and if you were to try and connect some of those dots in the programs, I mean, that would be entertaining to see how that would work out. Or this question over here?
I want to add something
Oh,
to
sure.
that. So personal security is a great place to start for everybody, particularly students. I watch my own sons do this, and I'm horrified. Anybody have a Facebook account? Okay, have you ever seen the questions that come up, like, what is your Greek god name? What's your porn star name, or whatever it is? And you're supposed to give them a combination of your birth date, your favorite color, and the car you drove when you were a kid. Anybody realize that those are actually the answers to the security questions for your bank? Okay, do you think it's an accident that they're trying to give you your Greek god name or whatever it is? No, those are actually forms of phishing attempts to get information out of you so they can compromise your identity. It's not fun, right? It's kind of cute when they do it in Facebook, but it's not about that. It's about they're stealing your information. And people need to become aware that that's actually what's going on in the background.
I'm hating this conversation more and more. Is it also the same thing like choosing my house for Harry Potter?
Oh yeah, same thing.
I actually haven't done that, but my kids have been trying to get me to do it for like a year and a half. All right, was there another question over here? I have others. Go ahead.
So one of the things I'm interested in knowing, this is primarily for Andy there, when you purchase cyber insurance, what are the criteria that you're looking at to gauge how much you're going to charge? Or is it more just how big you are and this fee, or do you really question them and find out what their status is before you charge them?
It's a good question. I don't make up the rates for the cyber insurance.
You didn't, but you might know that.
But yeah, so what carriers look at is, it's actually underwritten really, really well, in my opinion, the cyber insurance, and how they get to pricing and what coverage and what deductibles they'll give you are all contained in your insurance application. But, type of industry, gross annual revenue, number of employees, number of locations, those are your base criteria for developing your rate. And then when you get into, how much business income coverage are we going to give? What kind of deductible are we going to give? That gets into the planning questions. How prepared is your organization to deal with an event? They'll offer you a really affordable policy with really good limits, but a super high business income deductible or maybe no business income coverage for very limited if you don't have any plan whatsoever to deal with being shut down. So working through that is a big part of, we usually when we start the process, we get that, baseline information and we say, yeah, it might cost you $2,000 or $4,000 or whatever the annual premium is for these policies. And then we look at your application and kind of go through it. Sometimes people answer them too fast and they say, well, no, we don't have a plan, or no, we don't do this, or no, we don't do that. And I say, you might want to talk to somebody else and get some help with filling out that application. You probably do have these plans and procedures and are taking these steps, and they do matter. They matter quite a great deal when you're talking about the amount of coverage you get, not only in the eligibility, but the restricted nature of deductibles and all of that.
Can I follow on that question? So your policy, as you described, was $2,000 for a year. That seems very reasonable.
Yeah.
But in order to get that, how much additional, again, it may be stuff you're supposed to do anyway. I'm not suggesting that it's extra money, but do you have a feel for if someone came in completely unprepared and was like, no, I don't do anything, I'm just a guy, I have a machine shop, and no one cares. If they had to get to a point so that they would only have to pay $2,000 for that policy, any feel for what that might be?
Peter answered a question with the same answer, a different question. It is the basic stuff, right? It is just doing the basic stuff. They don't need to hire Peter in order to get the super cheap cyber policy and have the most sophisticated level of cyber protection in order to get that really affordable policy, right? It's just doing the basic stuff. They should have Peter anyway.
Right.
Of course.
Well, to camp on that a little bit, sorry for the self-promotion here, but when we get called into situations like that, we're often able to reduce the cost of the cyber insurance by a significant amount, sometimes as much as 50%, by putting in place the basics. It's never the fancy stuff, it's always the basics.
Passphrases, some guy already said it earlier. I'm going back and I'm taking away my passwords with all the, 7-character special characters. I'm doing passphrases. I mean, it is basic stuff.
Is a passphrase with special characters in it less secure?
No, it's just equivalent.
Okay, just
So
harder,
unless
just harder to
special characters
remember.
available, it matters, the length that matters.
Okay, we're gonna let that go. So is there another question? And we have a little bit of time, but there's no reason I can't give you some more time back in your day, particularly if you're at a 2-hour meter like I am. So, so I have a couple of takeaways that I'll sort of go over, and then I'll leave the panel here for some one-on-one questions. So number one, passphrases. So thank you NIST for this also. They were the one that initially forced the changing your password every 6 months, and all that resulted in mostly was whatever your password was, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? I mean, guilty, okay, and I've tried to keep my passwords, the things I think are important, as hard, and the other ones as easier. So NIST did come back and realize the guy in charge, total mea culpa, not a good idea. The other thing to realize, I think it's just a people problem, and the way I see this often is, the host for any one of these computer viruses is not necessarily your computer, it's a person. So the person is the one that goes off and forwards the thing out to the entire group that's the phishing expedition, or makes some other decision that causes the problem, that brings down the system. So, the virus comes into the person, gray matter, makes a bad decision, and then bad things happen. So training people, which is cheap from a technology perspective, but I mean, it's still time, right? I mean, you need to gather people in a room, you need to spend time on it. So I don't want to treat that as a non-cost event, but it's a sunk cost, it's an operational cost, it's a different type of cost. So, for goodness sake, those things seem like good things to do. And then insurance itself, not too expensive if you're doing the basic blocking and tackling that you would be expected to do. So with that, I'll leave the panel up here to answer some direct questions. Again, I'm David McPeters-Crown. I want to thank our panelists, John, Peter, and Andy, and again, our sponsors and this beautiful facility. Thank you very much, and have a good day.